realised something the other day, and that's that I talk about tattoos a lot with a lot of people. I have a lot of conversations about tattooing, and those conversations often leave me with more questions. You know, questions that I don't want to rush past, questions that I want to sit with, and questions that I want to follow a little bit more. So what I tend to do is research them and write about them in my regular column in Total Tattoo magazine, which I realised only the other day when I was chatting with Perry that I've been doing now for over 10 years. And I guess because of that sort of, process that's developed itself, the podcast and the column have always felt well linked to me. It's like a sort of feedback loop, if you like. And so towards the end of my old podcast, that tattoo show, I tried to bring them both together by using my column to inform episodes and questions on the show. Now, I didn't quite get to where I wanted it before the show ended, but I felt like I was on the right track. So this podcast picked up where that show left off, I guess, sort of. New conversations, new guests, new disagreements with people who make me pause mid-sentence, people who make me rethink the things that I thought were settled, and people who often remind me of how little I actually know. Now, at the beginning of this new journey, I focused mainly on interviews for the first few episodes. Honestly, that's because I actually thought I was a bit crap at doing interviews, and I didn't really feel fully comfortable with how to do them. I'm still making stuff up as I go along, but I knew that I needed a bit of practice in listening instead of talking all the time. And that in itself is very similar to when I started writing the column. You know, when I started out in tattooing and writing about it, I didn't really have a complete view of tattooing, not even close, to be fair. I mean, sure, I had opinions and strong ones at times, but perspective, I mean, that only comes with time, right? And 20 years of tattooing will give you that. So will listening to artists who came before me, listening to people who disagree with me, listening to stories that I didn't fully understand yet, listening long enough to realise the thing you were certain about 5 years ago doesn't quite hold up anymore. I guess it's because tattooing is bigger than your booth, it's bigger than the studio, it's bigger than the algorithm, and it's definitely bigger than any one person's version of it. Another thing I realised was that 4 years of podcasting with the same co-presenter taught me something that I just couldn't ignore, and that's if you talk about the same subject with the same person for long enough, you both stop learning. You get comfortable, you settle into positions, you repeat yourself, you mistake familiarity for insight. Now, that's not a criticism. It's just human, you know? I think growth needs friction. It needs interruption. It needs voices that don't sound like your own echo just coming back at you. That discomfort matters because stagnation doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly and convinces you that you've arrived. And the moment you think you've arrived, you've stopped moving. Now, conversations will always be at the centre of this podcast. They matter. They give us access to lived experience, to context, to nuance. They let us see around the corners we didn't even know existed if we just listen. But occasionally, if you don't mind, like this episode, I'll be the one doing the talking. And so, here I am, sitting in the studio, watching the winter sunlight slowly cut across the floor, thinking about my most recent column and how being prepared to listen and change my mind has helped me in many ways in my tattoo career. And I thought I'd discuss it with you because along the way I've learnt a couple of things. You see, most of what you believe about tattooing right now feels solid. That's normal. You've learnt it under pressure, in close quarters, from people whose approval mattered to you. Apprenticeships do that. They hardwire ideas into you about what good tattooing is, what bad tattooing is, what matters, what doesn't, who's doing it right and who isn't. Some of those ideas will save you years of mistakes, but some of them will quietly limit you if you never question them. The danger isn't learning strong opinions early. The danger is freezing them in place. Tattooing is always changing. Not just stylistically, but culturally, economically, socially. And if you stop updating your thinking, you don't stay still. You fall behind without noticing. That doesn't make you a bad tattooist. Again, it just makes you human. I've been tattooing for, I think, coming up on about 20 years now. Long enough to have been certain, wrong, certain again, and wrong in an entirely new way. long enough to have watched styles rise, peak, commercialise, collapse, and quietly re-emerge under different names, long enough to see scenes form, fracture, and reform around different values. What I've learned isn't a single lesson, it's a pattern. The tattooists who last creatively, financially, and mentally are rarely the ones who were right first. They're the ones who stayed curious. Curiosity doesn't mean chasing trends or abandoning fundamentals. It means refusing to confuse familiarity with truth. Early on, your world is small. One studio, handful of artists, a narrow slice of tattooing presented as the way. I mean, that's unavoidable. You need structure before you can safely dismantle it. But if you're paying attention, the cracks appear. You'll meet tattooists doing work that you were told didn't matter, and they're booked solid. You'll see artists with styles you were warned never to touch, and those tattoos last. You'll notice clients responding not to technical flexing, but to feeling understood. And that's usually when people double down or open up. Doubling down feels safer. It keeps your identity intact. This is how I tattoo. This is what I believe. This is where I stand. And opening up feels destabilising. It means admitting that what got you here might not get you to where you want to go next. And that moment matters more than you think. Tattooing isn't just marks in skin. It's a relationship between people, money, time, culture, and trust. If you ignore any of these for too long, the work suffers, even if the tattoos still look good on Instagram. One of the biggest shifts you'll experience, if you stay in this long enough, is realising that being a working tattooist is a different skill set to being a talented one. Working tattooists manage energy. They manage expectations. They manage difficult conversations, boredom, ego, insecurity, and repetition. They learn how to show up consistently when inspiration doesn't. They learn that longevity is a craft of its own and that no one teaches you that in an apprenticeship. For most of us, we usually learn this the hard way. Burnt out, frustrated, or quietly resentful of a job you once loved. This is where open-mindedness stops being a personality trait and becomes a survival skill. Staying open doesn't mean agreeing with everyone. It means listening long enough to understand why someone else's approach works for them. It means separating principles from preferences. It also means being able to say, that's not for me, but I can see why it exists. Tattoo culture isn't a fixed object. It's a living thing shaped by technology, economics, clients, artists, and wider social shifts. Pretending it should stay exactly as it was when you entered is a recipe for frustration. Every generation thinks the next one is ruining tattooing. And every generation is partly right and partly blind. Your job isn't to protect tattooing from change. It's to decide which changes you participate in, which you resist, and which you ignore entirely. That requires thought, it requires humility, and it requires the confidence to admit when your views need updating. If there's one thing worth doing early, it's this. Don't build your entire identity around being right. Now, I know that's a lot to take in, so I'm going to slow this down for a second and we'll make it a little more practical. These aren't rules, they're not commandments, they're just a few things that I think are worth carrying with you if you're early in your career, when your hands are still finding confidence and your opinions still feel a little sharper than your experience. These aren't things you'll hear shouted in studios or posted online very often, but they matter quietly over time. You don't need permission to do things differently. At some point, you'll feel the urge to step sideways from what you were taught. A different way of working, a different aesthetic, a different relationship with clients. That instinct doesn't need approval. But choosing to do things differently means you're choosing to be visible. And if you step outside the familiar lanes, people will watch you more closely. Some will question your decisions and others will test your resolve. A few will hope you fail so that they don't have to question their own choices. And again, this isn't cruelty, it's just human nature. If you want autonomy, you have to accept scrutiny without becoming defensive. Let your work, your consistency, and your standards do the talking. Be prepared to be scrutinised, but don't confuse that with hostility. Not every raised eyebrow is an attack. Not every question is disrespect. Sometimes scrutiny is just curiosity, concern, or unfamiliarity. Learn to sit with being questioned without rushing to justify yourself. Take what's useful, discard what isn't, and keep moving. Everyone has something they can teach you if you're willing to listen. It's easy early on to decide whose opinions count, to sort voices into neat categories, relevant and irrelevant, old school or new school, insider or outsider, that kind of thing. But that kind of thinking shrinks your world. Some of the most valuable lessons you'll learn won't necessarily come from people you admire stylistically. They'll come from clients, from artists working completely differently to you, or from people who can clearly explain why they make the choices they do. Listening doesn't weaken your position, it sharpens it. Be careful with the language that separates us. Pay attention to the words you repeat, especially the ones that divide. Real tattooing, proper tattooists, scratchers, fake artists, old guard, new kids, every one of those phrases builds a wall. I don't care what style you work in or what tools you use. What matters is that we're both serious about this art form and the people who trust us with their skin. If we start from that shared commitment instead of separation, the conversation changes immediately. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. It means recognising common ground before drawing lines. And that matters, not just for the culture, but for the future you're stepping into, because the future doesn't arrive all at once. And with all that said, I want to thank you for listening and getting to this point. I'm going to try and bring you some more episodes like this on a more regular basis. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing interviews. I'm just going to stop doing them as often. And I'm going to try and bring my column to life on this podcast and discuss the things that I discuss in that. That's the feedback loop that I'm talking about. And hopefully you'll enjoy these episodes because I enjoy doing them. Even though it's a bit weird sitting in a room on my own, chatting to a microphone. But I hope that some of what I've had to say has at least given you food for thought. Hopefully, it will save you from making some of the mistakes that I've made. And with that, I'll see you next time. Take care.